Good morning and welcome everybody on this gloriously sunny day. I hope that it is sunny where you are. I'm very excited to welcome you this morning to the first of our new series called The Interview, where senior figures from all walks of life and industries are interviewed by a panel of experts also from all industries. This morning, we're delighted to have on our panel a lawyer, a editor, a food service player, and a financial services expert. Now, as many of you know, us at EP, we're very passionate about and believe it of utmost importance to share the views of others, to hear other perspectives, and to share knowledge and learn from others. Today, we are delighted to be joined by an internationally renowned speaker, author, consultant, and in education and leadership, Ms. Clarissa Farr. It's an understatement to say that it has been a difficult time and that leaders and leadership has been put under immense pressure over recent years, but in particular over this pandemic period. The same can be said for young people and for emerging talent, as many argue that they have been the hardest hit during this pandemic, with specific reference to their education and future employment prospects. So how do we best nurture young people and talent for the future so that they do have a bright future and that we are all able to build back better together? Now, before we start to answer and discuss this and many more topics, it is absolute pleasure that I introduce Gavin Pooley, who's the Managing Director of Liquid Line. And without sponsors like Liquid Line, we are unable to host events like this. So I'd like to invite Gavin to say a few words.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning all. Great to be here today. And certainly on a sunny day, as you say, Lauren. Just a few words from me. It's great to have the opportunity to sponsor this event. Education, certainly a passion of mine, and I guess with 2 young children and returning to school, this is a very timely event. So just wanted to say a few words as to Liquid Line and what we do with education. I guess since our early beginnings in water, hydration in schools has been very much part of what we do. The, I guess, challenge that we were observing in the pre-COVID world was one around sustainability. So many schools, colleges, universities had a big drive to remove plastic, and certainly our Juice Touch system, which is a unit that provides a range of healthy, school compliant juice and water options, was gaining a huge amount of traction. And I guess that brings me to what someone said around the world's gone from saving the planet to saving lives, and we've certainly seen a move in our business and probably a temporary move away from the drive on removing plastic to providing, I guess, a safe experience. So as Liquid Line, we have created a range of touchless equipment now. So as students and staff return to schools, it's great to be able to assist in, I guess, creating a environment where there's a safe experience for water and coffee, and very happy to say the whole touchless innovation has really assisted and meant that income in regards to coffee, hot drinks has been able to be switched back on in many locations. So that's good. But I guess I'm sure Lauren, you would agree, and certainly Chris, that sustainability drive will come back. And it's great just to be able to work with student groups and help in remove plastic. And that's very much in line with government directive. So that's just a few words, Lauren. Certainly worked with many areas of education. The great University of Cambridge colleges was my stomping ground for many a year, and very much enjoyed that. But as a team with over 100 staff in the UK and Ireland, we be delighted to speak to any school, college, university, see how we can assist in these challenging times.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Gavin. That's wonderful. And now I take the pleasure in introducing Chris Shepardson, who's the founder of EP, to start off our first interview series. But before he does, I'd also like to ask you, you see at the bottom of your screen that there's a Q&A function. If you do have any questions for Chris or Clarissa or the panel, please do feel free to pop those down there, and we will do our best to answer them as we go. Chris, I hand over to you.
That's very kind, Lauren. Thank you. And thank you, Gavin, for those words as well. I think sustainability and touchless are going to become increasingly important as we go forward. Delighted to welcome Clarissa to the interview. Clarissa would like to come and join me. Clarissa is a trustee of the British Museum, obviously famed for being the former head of St. Paul's Girls' School. She used to be a former director of the Royal Ballet, on the board of the Royal Ballet, but is an author, written 2 books, which I believe, rest assured, I've read and are worth reading, because they're actually incredibly insightful. Coach, mentor, and speaker. So thank you for joining us today, Chris, and a real pleasure to meet you.
Great pleasure to be here, Chris, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
I think it'll be fascinating. I think the panel piece particularly will be, you're going to have all kinds of questions come at you, so I'm looking forward to that. But first, let's just kind of run through, because you cover, and you're an expert in a whole range of different areas. But let's start, probably the biggest discussion point nowadays is about leadership. And actually, lots of people have talked about a lack of trust in leaders. And I guess in the education sector, that's particularly important. I suppose let's start with, over your time, has the pressures on leadership changed? Have you seen that?
Yes, I mean, I think the whole nature of leadership has changed dramatically over the last decade or so. Obviously, there are particular things we could say about the last year, but I think within education and within many other sectors, we've moved from a kind of command and control style of leadership where there's an all-powerful CEO and what that person says is what happens, to a much more collaborative way of working. And maybe there's a recognition that engagement, employee engagement, is very important, and if people feel that they're part of the story and not just being, if you like, carrying out orders given from on high, then they're much more engaged and much more committed. So we've moved to a much more consultative, much more collaborative kind of leadership, and that's true in schools as well, not least because students themselves want to have an input into how schools work and how policy is played out. And we're seeing that in pretty dramatic form in our papers in the last week, are we not? I think in relation to the immediate past, the current situation within COVID, it's been very interesting how leadership online has given us a totally different take on what it is to manage an organization. So in a situation like we're in now, if you were having a board meeting like this, well, the chairman is in the same size box as everybody else, and we can see her or his kitchen, kettle. We're not looking at an incredible portrait or an incredible plate glass window behind that person. So there's been a very leveling effect, I think, through COVID, through leadership having to be carried out in a virtual form. And I think this might be for another conversation, but I think what I might think of as the more feminine aspects of leadership, the need to care about people in the round, the need to bring humanity to leadership, the need to understand that people have a whole life. They don't just come to work in a certain set of clothes and then go into a box when they go away. They have a whole life, and all parts of it mix with all other parts of it. You see that when you see people in their domestic setting. So I think it will have an after effect of a very interesting morphing of leadership from something very monolithic, very set, very fixed, very deliver orientated, to something much more complicated, more nuanced, more collaborative. And of course, I'm hoping that means more women will rise to the very top.
Yeah, we'll touch on that as we go. But actually in schools, I guess that's been the case for a long time. It always occurs to me that the pressure on schools is immense. And actually the pressure on the education system seems to have increased quite a lot over the last 20 years as well. And I do wonder where we place too much pressure on the young as they're coming through the system. And that's creating part of this fear of failure that everyone talks about.
Yes, I suppose we do. I mean, I think their aspirations are different from the aspirations of a previous generation. And when we talk about pressure on them, I suppose I think more about the kind of conversations they want to have about their futures and how those differ from the conversations that maybe their teachers or their parents would have wanted to have. So if you like, the divergence of a vision of what your future might look like is much greater now than it was before. Young people are digitally native, they don't have the same unquestioning respect for institutions, for banks, for the great institutions of society. Those have proved themselves to be untrustworthy, unfortunately, over the last decade or so. And young people therefore take a much more pragmatic, much more questioning view, I think, of the world and what they want to do within it. So, and I mean, the last year has put them under enormous pressure, and it's ripped away a lot of opportunity that they could have expected to have had. I'm thinking about the young who are perhaps emerging from education now into the world of work. So I think that, you know, we've yet to see what the implications of that will really be.
Yeah, it must be incredibly strange for them at this point in time. We've done a lot, haven't we, in the last 20 years about increasing the pressure to go to university. And that has its own dynamic. Is a university degree something we should be really pressurizing people to do? Is it as important, or should we be trying to get a better balance, do you think?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think several things. I think there is still a place for the undergraduate degree and the postgraduate degree, but I think the proliferation of universities and the proliferation of courses and qualifications that are now branded as degree has resulted in a much broader range of quality, and some of that degree education is not really worthy of the name, I don't think. So I think we should still be building excellent universities. Gavin's talked about Cambridge already today, and there are many other great universities both in this country and around the world, and it's important that as centres of knowledge and of exploration, those are maintained. But I think that there are many other routes into the world of work for the young now. I was interested in a study that Google produced a couple of years ago now, saying, you know, we want people who can collaborate, who can solve problems, who can apply their knowledge, who are pragmatic, who are resilient, and we don't care where they got those skills. Those are the skills we will pay off on. We don't care where they got them. So the idea that if you have a first-class degree from Oxford, the world is going to be your oyster, not necessarily. So I think we need to embrace the fact that there are many more routes from education into work, and stop being quite so narrow-minded and hierarchical about what those routes might be.
I mean, one of our big passions is about enabling the young. Because it's interesting what you're saying, but they question more, because actually I find them incredibly respectful. And actually it's really, I mean, I'm sure if we ask Vince when he comes on, when he became a board director, I suspect his late 20s, early 30s. And actually I know my generation, a lot of them were directors by the age of 30. Now the average age is about 48. And actually the average age of a chief executive is now 58. So we've created this process that actually makes it harder to get career advancement at the same speed that our generation had. So are they being too respectful to that? Or should they challenge that more?
I'm laughing because I don't have a huge amount of experience of over-respectful young people. I suppose the young people that I have worked with most recently, I'm not just thinking about my own children in their early 20s, but the girls at St Paul's definitely didn't suffer from an oversupply of respect, and unless what you were saying could be respected intellectually, because they would be challenging everything. I don't mean in terms of discourtesy, they were extremely courteous, but you had to win respect, and you had to win it by having a good argument, and you couldn't win it just by being a teacher or being older or whatever. So I don't necessarily agree that well, this certainly hasn't been my experience that they're overburdened with respect. I think it's interesting what you say about the average age of certain positions being reached. I did also read recently that, although we have this idea that most entrepreneurs are sort of 12 or very young, in fact, the average age for most successful entrepreneurs is also well into the 40s. And I mean, I think we shouldn't be particularly het up or surprised about that, because in the sort of businesses that we're familiar with, experience does count for something. And actually, especially in managing people, I definitely think it wasn't part of my training, but learning how to manage a big team of people and how to marry the interests of very disparate stakeholders and so on is a thing that you only learn by doing it, because it's a subtle and nuanced business, which is about timing. It's about what not to do as well as what to do. It's not something you can just suddenly be good at and therefore suddenly be successful in doing. I also think that young people today are less interested in the sort of traditional hierarchies and structures that we are familiar with. So the idea of climbing a greasy pole within a quite set organization, getting to this level, this level, this level, is interesting to some of them, but to some of them it's not very interesting. And they're much more attracted to a sort of branching career path where you do one thing for a bit, and then when you get bored with that, you do something else, and then you do something else, so that your career path is not a single trajectory climbing up to responsibility, but it's a more portfolio kind of diverse experience. I think that attracts many more of them now. Yes, I think both are important, but certainly I'm not troubled by excessive respect. No.
Well, that's encouraging. Well, now, in your books, you write a lot about the importance of being an individual and actually guiding your own journey. It's something very close to your heart, isn't it? Do you want to expand a bit more?
Absolutely, I really do think that. I think, well, my coach, who's no longer really my coach, but a friend, Gillian Stamp, who I write about quite a bit in my book. One of the gifts that she gave to me was the language in which to understand the problems that I was dealing with, and imagery to understand that. And in terms of thinking about the self, the image that I like is that of a piece of wood. I'm looking at my wooden kitchen table now. Wood has a grain in it. If you look at a tree, it has a grain in it, and we all have a grain within ourselves. And what our life is the attempt to find and follow that grain. And that might mean doing not the thing that's expected. It often means doing not the thing that's most easy. But if you have that fundamental sense of the growth and development of the self, then following the grain is what we all have to do. And because no two pieces of wood are the same, no two people's journeys are the same. And I think within education and with the young, they are at the beginning of that exploratory experience. It goes on throughout life, I believe, but our role as educators is to help them begin to find that grain. And that's what we're really talking about when we think about what are my strengths, what are my aptitudes, what do I find more difficult, when am I doing something that doesn't feel like work, but because it comes so naturally to me. And all our careers advice and our higher education advice and our subject choice advice is they're really manifestations of that, looking for that grain. So yes, I do believe that very much.
Now, it occurs to me when you're running a school like St. Paul's, the biggest problem must be the parents, isn't it?
I think most heads would say that 95% of the parents are fantastic. I still rely on and enjoy the support and friendship of many parents at St. Paul's now. I was talking to one only yesterday on the phone, and so for the most part, my parents there were very invested in their daughter's education and very supportive of the school. That 5%, or maybe even smaller, of difficult parents, of course, took up much more time than the other 95%. And yes, I mean, you will always have difficult and demanding parents. I think as a woman, there were a few fathers who found it difficult to deal with me as a figure of authority. So I have had one or two interesting conversations, let's say, with fathers who didn't agree with what I'd done about this or that. And they found that quite tough. But I think the thing always to remember about parents is that however powerful they are in their daily lives, if you like, even if they're members of the government or running enormous organizations or whatever, when it comes to their children, we are all vulnerable. Because you're dealing with a thing that matters to you more than anything, matters to you much more than your share price, what's happening to your daughter. And also it's a place where most parents feel vulnerable. And if you can remember that, what sometimes comes out as anger or criticism is usually covering fear or insecurity of some kind. And so I always tried to, if you like, get behind the manifesting behavior if it was difficult, to see what the fearful thing was that was within. And that way, I think, if parents can understand, you're absolutely on the same side, because the only thing that matters is the interest of that young person. And we're not at odds. We're just coming from two different places to the same objective. And if they can come to understand that, and you see their shoulders drop, then you can usually get a good solution for the daughter or son.
Now, you write in your books a lot about the mental health issue as well. And actually, we're learning a lot, aren't we? The way we think about things has changed quite tremendously in the last 10 years alone, hasn't it?
Yes.
And how food service as well plays a big role in the nutrition, and how we probably need to give more thought to that as well. That's close to your heart as well, isn't it?
Very much so. Well, two big subjects there. I think on mental health, it's been, when I think back to the early years of my first headship, nobody used the term mental health. What was that? We never talked about that unless we had very, very occasionally something extremely serious to deal with. But it wasn't a term that was in sort of common parlance within the pastoral life of the school at all. And that changed when the young royal family started to talk about depression and mental health, and they aligned themselves with some of the big mental health charities, and Prince Harry started to talk about how he felt after the death of his mother and so on. And it started to become more discussable. It wasn't a taboo subject, and it became a thing, and it became something you could talk about, and something that it didn't feel embarrassing or shameful to discuss. And I think that was a very good thing. It was obviously important that happened. I do think, however, that now we have rather thrown a fire hydrant at mental health. And, life is hard. It's been very hard in this last year. It's always hard at some point for most people. And, I think there is something which is sadness and unhappiness that's a part of normal human experience. It doesn't mean you are clinically depressed necessarily. So I think we have, as with many things, we've over-medicalized mental health now, and actually we need to get back to the place where we can distinguish between what is genuine mental illness. Mental health obviously is what we should be aiming for, not what we should be getting away from. Mental illness is the problem. And just the raft of human experiences and human emotions, which we just have to learn to live with and build resilience to manage. So that's mental health. You asked about food.
Service, yeah. That's also, you wrote a whole chapter on that in your book.
Yes, I think food is incredibly important as part of life, and part of its fuel. It's what keeps us healthy, but it's also what gives us pleasure. It is social, and it's learning to eat healthily, eat well, and to respect food, to know where food comes from, how to grow food, how to cook food, is all an important part of education. So when I first went to St. Paul's, and I saw, first of all, that the teachers ate different food from the students, and the students were served far too much processed food, I thought, with very little choice. I thought, well, we have to do something about this. And I had taken food service by the scruff of the neck in my previous school, and we did the same at St. Paul's. And I mean, I think the fundamentals of it are that you have to get away from the idea of school food. I mean, we all have an image of school food. Everyone listening now can think of something absolutely disgusting from school that they now still can't eat. What's yours?
Spam.
Spam, there you are, you see. Mine is semolina. So we can all think of something absolutely disgusting that we can't bear to eat, and that's our image of school food. So you have to get rid of that idea completely and have a kitchen which a really good chef wants to cook in, and then you have to provide the resources for them to do that. And over time, obviously, it's about having the right team, about showing a real interest. I spent a lot of time in the kitchens at St. Paul's, swapping recipes.
Are you a good cook?
Well, of course, nobody would admit they were a good cook, Chris, would they? I like cooking. I like cooking, and I love to see the girls enjoying their food at the school. So I do think it's extremely important, and there is absolutely no reason why you can't have a meat choice, a vegetarian choice, a food theatre choice, a salad bar, a pudding that you would love your mother to make, but she probably never does, and fruit, all for a reasonable per capita cost if you source properly, and if you run an efficient service within the kitchen, and if you have motivated staff. We absolutely did it, and you can do it. So, and I think all children have a right to that, and all schools should be able to do that.
Well, I'm sure we can get a lot of questions on that from the panel. Let's talk a bit about you before we move to the panel, because it occurs to me that you're in this big role as head. You stepped down, and now you're doing a whole variety of careers, from speaking to mentoring to helping search companies to everything else. What's been your biggest surprise, and what's that journey been like? Because it must be very strange from going from this role where you are the leadership symbol to something which is more pluralist approach.
Well, I think I would compare it to, it's part of, in a way, it's all part of finding that grain. But the image I like, which I think can apply to anyone who's making a big change in their life, is of the sigmoid curve, the S-shaped curve. So, if you're, as High Mistress of St. Paul's, I started at the bottom of the curve, didn't know anybody's name, didn't know which way the doors opened, didn't know anything. Gradually, you become more, you learn, you become more competent, you become more expert. And of course, like any curve, eventually it starts to come back down the other side. And the time to leave a thing is before you get to the top of that curve, before you get to the point where there is no more you can do. And I hope that my decision to leave came quite unexpectedly to me, and rather before I thought it was going to. But it was very clear to me that the work I wanted to do there was finished. And what you have to do then is jump off. And of course, then you dip and you go into a period of uncertainty, but you have to do that in order to climb a new curve. So I think that it's been for me quite scary, suddenly not to know who I was professionally, not to be High Mistress of St. Paul's anymore. In some ways, it's been incredibly liberating because when you introduce yourself as the High Mistress of St. Paul's, there's sort of a bit of an image goes before you. And now I've been able to, if you like, unwrap myself from that image and find out gradually who the person is who's inside.
Well, I was going to say that because that's the next part, isn't it? Because you talk about the importance of being an individual. People write about how accessible they always found you. Was it you? Did they get to the real you when you were running the leadership role, or was that taking a journey for you as well?
No, I hope. Yes, I think I was an authentic leader. I would like to feel. I mean, you have to find, as a leader in any setting, whether you're running a big catering company or a hotel or any other business, I'm sure you have to find slightly different modes for different audiences and different ways of being for different situations. So if you're addressing an enormous conference for 1,000 people, you'll be in one mode. If you're talking to a distressed colleague whose dog has just been run over, you'll be in a different mode, and everything in between. It doesn't mean any of those are false. They're just the different voices that you have to find within yourself to meet the need of the particular situation. So I think in relation to head teachers, there is a sort of quite annoying stereotype. I mean, we can all remember when poor Theresa May, who didn't have a great time as Prime Minister, said she was going to bring back grammar schools, and all the caricature cartoons in the paper the next day were this harridan woman with very, very square shoulder pads and a long pointed nose and fingernails going like this, and a sort of a scary witch-like kind of figure. And well, we're meeting today. I'm hoping I don't give that impression, but who knows? But I think there is that stereotype, perhaps, and maybe then when people meet a real person, they're a bit surprised.
Right, before we move on to the panel, final question. Obviously, you're a big advocate of women in society, the role of women in society. What changes are you seeing, and how far have we come, and how far have we got to go?
Well, I think the short answer is not enough and a very long way. Maybe we should wait till I can have a good conversation with Kathryn about this a bit later.
Perfect. Well, let's bring the panel in at this point. Alex, Ramesh, and Kathryn, would you like to come in at this point? I think Vince has obviously got an internet problem, so we'll come back and bring him in as we come back. Lovely to see you all. So, Kathryn, should we kick off with you as we're starting on the female, particularly in the role of women?
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far. So we do have a couple of questions just so we can dig in a bit more on some of the topics we talked about. And thinking about leadership, the role of schools in leadership. I don't even think I heard that word in the first 18 years of my education. What do you think the role is of schools in leadership, and when should that start to be talked about? How is that done, and the journey through the schools?
Great question, Kathryn. And I think I'm probably with you that in my own education it wasn't too much of a big thing. But I mean, the answer is it should be talked about right from the earliest years, I think. So when I would interview, for example, 10-year-olds to come to St. Paul's, often these little girls would arrive with their blazer on and a row of badges down the side. And one of our talking points would be, well, tell me what your badges all stand for. Well, this one means I'm form captain. And what does form captain have to do? Well, I have to give out the exercise books every day and I have to take them back in, or whatever it might be. And this one means librarian, which means I put the books away at the end of the day. Or this is debating, whatever it might be. So I think typically now in primary schools, there's lots of credit given for leadership and responsibility. And there's a culture in which there's encouragement to take on roles of leadership. I think the word responsibility is maybe equally important, because this is about teaching children that leadership is not about telling people what to do. It's about helping other people do things, and coordinating and making something work better than it would work otherwise. So, so a broader definition of leadership, if you like, and going back to what we were saying earlier about more collaborative leading, which is much more the way I think now. So I think it should start very early. And I think for women, obviously in particular, which is our special interest, although not our exclusive interest, in girls' schools particularly, there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities to lead. I mean, you know, the person who gets the leadership role is always going to be female in a girls' school. So the first violin in the orchestra will be a girl. If you do Macbeth, Macbeth will be played by a girl, and so on. So I think one of the wonderful things about girls' schools is that girls learn subliminally that there isn't anything they can't do, and there isn't any role of responsibility that they can't take, because all the people who do take those roles are girls. I think that as we've been saying, the nature of leadership is changing, and I think we have to remain in our generation, my generation, we have to remain receptive and thoughtful and creative about what we think it is, and what it looks like, because otherwise I think we could be in worrying about the young not, if you like, getting it, we could become out of touch ourselves with what kind of leadership is useful and what kind of leadership is creative and is additive and not destructive.
Interesting. Ramesh, can I bring you this point?
Good morning. And I think, as I said before all this started, I've never called a teacher by her first name, so I'll call you Hi Mistress. Good morning again.
I feel I should see at this point, but I won't.
Okay. Can we, inevitably, Chris, can we start with the landmark government review, which was published this morning? And it talks about children from the ethnic minorities outperforming their white peers at school. What's your view on it? Why do you think this is happening?
Well, I'm surprised it's taken all this time for that review to be published, quite frankly, because I would have predicted that was the case a long time ago. One of my early experiences was as senior mistress, now there's another nice title, at Leicester Grammar School. This is before I went to work in the Far East, where Leicester, as you know, has a very substantial Asian population. And most of the students in the school were of Asian origin, and there was the most phenomenal work ethic in that school. And I'm not saying it came solely from the cultural background of those students, but there was an absolutely serious and energetic commitment to success and to academic work there. And I saw then models of student application and attitude and parental attitude that I would have loved to have seen modeled for some of the other kinds of families I've dealt with since. So I'm not surprised by that. You know, it's frankly, as an educator at the moment, it's rather nice to read some good news about schools, and that there's something that we might have been doing well, rather than suffering from a great deal of blame and criticism and being the sort of bin into which you throw all problems, so to speak. So I think it's great. I mean, you were saying earlier before we went on air that there is a problem with the ghettoization of certain cultures and nationalities within schools. And I think there is a kind of double think that parents will often say, I want an international education for my child, but actually they don't want it too international. They want it international enough and international in the right way, quite often. And you won't be shocked at all to hear that I've been in many conversations about percentages of certain nationalities in the schools that I've run, and where there are concerns about one particular nationality starting or one particular kind of ethnicity starting to dominate too much, and others not being sufficiently represented. So it's a complex thing, but the fundamental message of what we've heard today is a very positive one, and we must make sure we build on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vince, can I bring you in at this point?
Yeah, good morning. We were talking earlier about, Chris mentioned about, my sort of career and being given opportunity, really, sort of first board director at 28. Actually, from an entrepreneurial point of view, didn't start actually till I was 48. And actually, I'm glad that was the case, because in that sort of build up, I made a lot of mistakes. And actually, you were able to bring that to bear, thankfully, for benefit. There are a number of things I was interested in the book, but one of those was about how you teach resilience in youngsters. You alluded to some time in the Far East at Shartin College, and you talked there very much about there was a culture of resilience and entrepreneurialism. So I'm interested how you feel resilience can be built in young people.
It's another great question, Vince. Thank you very much for it. And I'm very impressed that you've read the book that closely. So thank you for doing that as well. I think the particular culture that I found in Hong Kong at that time was very entrepreneurial, and the resilience of the students was very much born of the fact that they were used to moving around the world with their parents quite regularly, and therefore, you might be in Sydney for 2 years, you might then be in Singapore for 2 years, you might be in Hong Kong for 2 years, and if you're a kid, you're going to be suddenly parachuted into another school. You don't know how long you're going to be there, but you've got to get on with the other kids and make friends and just get on with it. And there were a lot of, I noticed how good they were at doing that they didn't take them 3 years to make a friend, because they might have moved somewhere else by that time. So I think that was a factor there. In terms of my experience in this country and more generally, I think resilience has become another of those rather overused words, actually, and because I think it suggests something quite hard edged. Yes, that there's Matthew Syed's books, and there's Bounce Not Break, etc., and how we come back from problems. I rather prefer to think about resourcefulness than resilience. I think what we're really talking about is the ability to deal with problems, find ways through them and around them, and find opportunity within them quite often. So if I had a student at St. Paul's who failed at something, and they were not used to failing at things, so that was a problem to them, I would be wanting to help that young person see how they could learn from that failure and move beyond it, not necessarily see how they could just bat it away and not care about it, if you see that difference. So resilience, yes, sounds great, and of course it's a valuable thing, but if you're only insulating yourself, if you're only putting on body armor so that you're not hurt by the bad things that happen, you're missing the opportunity to learn from them. So if actually you can face the failures and see what gift you might have been given that you can't see straight away within that failure, and what growth can come from it, then that's a better life lesson than simply.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Alex, can I bring you in at this point?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello, Miss Farr.
Alex, please.
My father is married to a headmistress of an Edinburgh school, and we still call her by her maiden name. More out of jest than anything else. She's lovely, great fun. I just wanted to go back to the subject of food service in schools. Traditionally, I would probably argue from the research we've been doing in setting up these awards for food service in Scotland in education, that food service hasn't always been a priority for parents necessarily when they're selecting a school. Traditionally, there might be, league table results, academic success, sporting facilities, that kind of thing that parents naturally look for. But we're finding now that food service is increasingly important in education. how do you think we can influence those schools to prioritize food and nutrition in perhaps the ways that they hadn't thought about it before?
Well, I guess if they're going to be exposed to some kind of gastronomic league table, then that might produce a motivation in itself. And if the private schools and they're having to compete for families to sign up, then that would in itself be an incentive. But how you do that in a rather more educationally valuable way, I think is to get schools to understand that, as I was saying earlier, that food and everything about it is a fundamental part of education. What we eat, where it comes from, how we cook it, and so on, is important to know about. And I think the other thing, what we noticed was, when we put a lot of effort into this, was that the girls went home and talked about what they'd eaten. And in fact, I used to have parents seeing me on Parents' Evening and saying, look, could you just stop serving confit of duck for lunch?
Expectations were growing at home, were they?
Yes. You know, my daughter's tastes are just becoming way too sophisticated. Could you just serve plain chicken occasionally?
Too much pressure.
So, but the fact that the children went home and talked about what they ate and talked about it with enjoyment. All parents want to see their children happy and well fed. It's absolutely visceral and fundamental. So I think schools, there is a sort of halo effect from it that goes home, which is important. And there's all sorts of learning that can spin off from it, which is also very enjoyable. So we had bush tucker trials at school. We had the head of biology going up onto the stage and in trying a locust in front of the whole school, and you know, a bit like a Cheerio, he said. Well, that brought the house down, as you can imagine. So and different forms of protein. We had a day where we served ostrich, for example, and they saw whether they like that. So there is a lot of learning that can be done through food. And if you can get them to stay at the table and talk to each other and make conversation, that's also very good learning. And we're always telling the parents, you know, eat together as often as you can. We know you may not be able to do it every day, but try and have family meals, because that's when the children will talk to you. They will test out their ideas. So parents can then become participants in the education through the medium of eating and of food. So I think those are some of the things that can be done. I think it probably takes people like you, Alex, to get in front of parents to talk about these things, and it would be good to offer to do sessions. And you know, if the school has a parent education program, we had that. We would do a session on sleep. We did a session on how you can help them during preparing for exams. You could easily run a session on food and why it's important. You know, it's making it, it's surfacing it in the parents' minds as a thing, and something where there is potential to add value and to add enjoyment and to add understanding as well.
That's great, thank you. That comment you made about ostrich struck a chord, because our little local primary school likes to try new things, and our middle son came home one day saying that they'd served him crocodile. And the whole school crocodile, and then he followed it up with, but I don't think it was locally sourced, Dad. Because they've been teaching about locally sourcing in one, and you know, the importance of it. And it was just the way he thought about it. He said, I don't think it's locally sourced.
And good for him, what a great observation.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't seem to be thinking about this for a while. I haven't seen any alligators around here for a while.
Chris, can I just touch on the food aspect? Because I think you made a very important point there, which is it's not just the food, but if you take the Japanese example, and we've all seen these videos where the 5-year-old kids first come and clean their dining table, then go wash their hands, pick up their food, eat together, then clean the table, wipe the floor before they go back to the class. And it's picking up a habit which then becomes a habit at home as well. And again, this idea which you said, that families that eat together also live together and stay together. And I think it's essentially this whole idea of saying, what are we trying to do in terms of education? If the idea is to create a healthy society, a happy society, then all these things are integral. And if this whole thing about male-female roles are now sort of diminishing, and I think that's a positive from the COVID situation as well, in terms of parental sort of leave and other aspects of it. I think this could be something which maybe we need to adopt and say, let's start in primary schools.
Definitely. I mean, it's a missed opportunity not to make it a feature of the education. Totally missed opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I was fortunate when we started our own business with private equity backing. We picked up a contract in Durham schools, which actually became one of the pilot schools for the free school meal trials, which was established by the then Labour government. The problem has been in my view, in about consistency of trying to track the benefit of food. We all know it benefits, but actually it'd be great if it could be measured so that you could look at it in terms of both performance and attainment, particularly the latter. One of the frustrating things about that, that whole trial, so the whole of 220 odd primary schools all had free school meals for 2 years. And it was clear that there was evidence of improvement in attainment, particularly in maths, but also in English. The problem was it got cancelled because there was a change of government. The National Audit Office review came after the free school meal trial had ended. And then we had this change of tack. Gove then did his bit with Minister Dimbleby, which in the end was fine. But it seems to me we've never stuck at something. Obviously, you've predominantly been in the independent sector, but obviously there are millions of children who in inner cities are not getting fed properly, go to school hungry, etc., etc. So I would love to see some sort of evidence that is pushed through to show that it does make a difference. Because if we started to see attainment and performance, you will know, and you probably got some examples, Clarissa, in your school where you've seen the evidence of how food helps. But it would be great if it could be measured. We had it there at the fingertips, and it was a bit of a lost opportunity. Okay, we've got free school meals for Key Stage 1, but actually, we really ought to be pushing this a lot more, in my view. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
No, Vince, I completely agree with you. And of course, I've been talking just on this call about an environment of privilege where, I've been talking really about how we can have great food in schools, not unappetizing food, which might still be, would do the job, but not be adding anything. So, but what you're talking about now is the really extreme end of this issue, where you've got children coming to school, as you say, who haven't eaten anything or have had a bag of crisps for breakfast or whatever, and are not properly nourished, and therefore, of course, can't concentrate and so on. And that will be typically part of a whole constellation of deprivations that child will have, which isn't just about nutrition, but is partly about that. And where we need to be improving. And I know that a lot of schools now are creating breakfast clubs, for example, where the children can have something to eat when they have a hot drink and have something to eat when they come to school. But that needs to be. I suppose it needs to go into the inspection framework. It needs to be part and parcel of what gets a school over the line to remain open and be compliant. And it may be that we need to blanket certain standards in the food offer for all, in order to capture those children who, if they don't have that breakfast club at school, are not going to have breakfast at all, rather than trying, if you like, to isolate particular segments within the system. But I think it's a really important point, and yes, we should be thinking about how to do that. How you would start to really map attainment, intellectual or scholastic attainment against eating. I don't know how easy that would be to do, but you're saying you think there is research.
Well, what happened was that they identified some evidence of the advancement in maths and English, but because there were other things going on, they weren't able necessarily to do it to one thing. But it just seemed a shame that it wasn't carried on and fulfilled. I mean, I guess, you know, as you say, clinical or sort of measured evidence of just one thing is going to be quite difficult. But I think there's certainly, the research I've looked at, there is certainly evidence in the states of performance links and certain things providing evidence. And I just think it would be great to get in behind it a lot more. You know, there does seem to be a shift. There does. Marcus Rashford's clearly helped, and there does seem to be an appetite now to put food higher on the agenda, the obesity issues and so on and so on. So yeah, fingers crossed.
I think I'm just finally on that. I mean, I do think it's important to tie it to the responsibility to look after the child as a whole. You know, I wouldn't want to get into a situation where the only reason to provide good food was to improve the maths stats you know, I think that's the danger of isolating it in relation to achievement. This is about a holistic responsibility for the next generation, which goes much wider than whether they get maths GCSE or not. Yeah.
Kathryn, can I bring you back in?
Thank you. I am interested in food too. My sister's a teacher, and she's seen the benefits and the pitfalls because she lives in an area where there's primarily migrants, and all the kids come for breakfast club. There would be no breakfast, so it's a very important area that we're both very interested in too. But I will take a bit of a shift. You very kindly shared the work that you had done with your coach, and you're also a qualified coach yourself. And not everyone can afford a coach. Not everyone has been in a space where they've known of coaches before. So can you talk a little bit about the benefits of coaching, but also the roles of mentors and how mentors aren't qualified coaches, but where the role of mentors has been helpful for young people as well, and how that can take them through their careers too?
Yes, of course, and it's an interesting distinction, Kathryn, isn't it? And in fact, funnily enough, I was in a conversation yesterday where people were disagreeing happily about what the difference is between coaching and mentoring. And I mean, I guess broadly speaking, my understanding, prefacing my answer to you, is that coaching is more, if you like, content-free in the sense that it's a set of skills and a set of questioning skills largely that you apply to somebody who is complete and resourceful and whole in themselves, and that will bring the answers out of themselves. Whereas mentoring is more a relationship where you may have some specialist knowledge of the field of the mentee, and therefore you're able to model and suggest solutions to problems in a more concrete way than you might do as a coach, where you could be coaching someone whose field of interest is totally different from your own, say. So, but I think there are a lot of gradations actually between the two in a way, and I think it's a pity to have to completely see them as separate things. But mentoring of the young, first of all, is obviously incredibly important. And I think what I've observed is that in any structure, because a mentor-mentee relationship is so chemical in a way, it's about an instinctive connection. What's important is to provide a structure in which young people have choice. So rather than saying, okay, we're going to bring in a mentoring system now, here's your mentor, and here's your mentor, and here's your mentor, it's much more fruitful to have a culture of mentoring whereby it's made very easy for people who are perhaps, if it's a work situation, people who are less far advanced in their career, to be seeking out mentoring or where mentoring relationships can evolve more organically, where they're natural, if you like. So in the school context, we would have heads of year, you would have a tutor, you would have the deputy head responsible for pastoral care. you might most naturally choose your tutor or find that your tutor was your mentor. But equally, you might have a really good rapport with the head of chemistry who taught you, and you might actually find that you were getting more from that person. So I think mentoring is a culture rather than a label, if you like, and it's best where those relationships are encouraged and can develop naturally. And certainly, I mean, I'm sure you can think of mentors that you've had in your career. You may still have them, and I do. Gillian, who coached me, I would say is still my mentor in a way. So I think it's important. They're important throughout life. They're not the same as role models. There's another area we could talk about. But I do think it's important to have the habit in any organisation, school or business, where there is a sharing of issues and a sharing of expertise, and also where reverse mentoring can happen. And I think particularly, and I can see from your expression that you're very familiar with it, very particularly in relation to gender, where the older, more powerful male executive is mentored by a younger woman who they contract to agree will call him out on unconscious bias, or suggest other ways in which he might frame his questions to female colleagues, let's say. And that can be very creative as well. In fact, one of my fathers at St. Paul's had a mentor who was a young woman in his company, and he said it was by far the best professional development he'd ever had, and he had no idea how his completely sort of buried and unconscious behaviours were actually noticed and were not really propitious to the relationships that he wanted to build around him. So I think it's a fascinating area. I'd love to learn more about how it's done within your world, actually.
I'd be delighted to. Between sponsors, advocates, mentors, coaches, all of these different areas, there's roles to each play. And as you say, there's people's definition of one versus the other. But I think the idea of sharing and people coming together,
yes,
to be able to do that, none of us have done it alone.
That's true.
Relationships.
Yeah.
Very true. Ramesh.
I think just touching back on this whole thing about you mentioned the greasy pole in terms of a career, etc. Because I now want to bring mentoring in as well, because I do mentor young people, and I say don't look at your career as a ladder, but look at it as a maze, and that the path to power is a path of turns within turns, and this whole idea of actually saying build on lateral skills, and look at lateral moves as well, and enjoy the journey rather than focusing on the destination. Because I think a lot of people, I mean, I sometimes look back on my career and think, okay, I made it to where I wanted to be, but I enjoyed the journey as well, because without that, it would have been a completely empty success for me. So I just wanted you to comment on that, and just going back to food, because that does fascinate me. In India, we support a charity, Kathryn, you might be interested, where we actually give free food to tempt the very poor children to go to school. And in order to get that free food, they then end up spending the whole day learning. So it can be used the other way around as well.
That sounds a really brilliant idea. Really brilliant idea. Yes. Remind me what the first part of your question was.
No, this about how you look at your career, whether we should all be focused on this idea of climbing the ladder, and then the fear of failure as well.
Yes, I mean, you know, everything is a journey. Here's another overused word, journey. Everyone's talking about the journey, aren't they now? That's another rather sort of overused word. But I mean, I suppose what the idea is that continually throughout life, we are living now. We're living in the moment, and our experience is right now. So it's a recipe for, I suppose, dissatisfaction and frustration to only be thinking about the end point, because in fact the end point is never reached. Yeah. And what you thought might be the goal might change, and that goal might dissolve and another one might appear. I tended to think, the image of the mountain ranges, the girls would think about, you know, looking to the next peak, but, you know, as they got nearer to it, another one would appear. So, you know, one is always traveling in a way. And I think in education, enjoying that process is very important. I think one of the things that's mitigated against that is the emphasis on testing and on assessment. If you're too focused on, you know, whether you're going to get 10 A stars or 3 A's or whatever it is, then you can forget to be fascinated by what you're learning, and you know, and of course everything about the unspoken curriculum and the hidden curriculum, the things that we actually remember and which become part of us when we leave school, have in many cases very, very little to do with the taught curriculum at all. So to be alive to what we're learning about relationships, about culture, about values, about how to live in community with people, these are the things that survive our education, I think, rather than 15 dates in history that are important.
So should people be upset that we could have assessment this year rather than exams?
I think what I hope will happen is that the whole assessment system will be overhauled as a result of what's happened, because it is not, it was monolithic and unfair and unsuccessful and inefficient before. We can't put everything into the hands of schools, because that isn't, you can't moderate that properly, and that will be eventually discredited. So that doesn't work either. I think assessment should be as light touch as it can be, so that it doesn't invade, as you're saying, so it doesn't invade education too much. It's necessary to have assessment, because you have to triage people to the next stage of whatever they're going to do. As we said earlier, it doesn't have to be university, it could be all sorts of other things. So I think it's unrealistic to think that we're ever going to be at a point where we don't have any assessment at the end of each stage of education, but it should be lighter touch, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens this year. I just wish they'd make their minds up so that schools could plan.
Thank you.
Alex.
Hello. Just touching back on nutrition within education. We're interested, when we're researching these education awards, on the different approach through sort of in-house caterers and contract caterers within the schools. You perhaps famously left or asked a caterer at St. Paul's to walk out the door, and then you took it in-house. I hope I'm not stepping out of line by saying that. I was interested to find out what was the transition like, and did you feel it had the desired effect when you brought the catering in-house?
I think what I learned about in-house versus contract, I really learned at Queenswood in my previous headship, where I, as a very young and inexperienced head, sat at the first sort of beauty parade of Sodexo and Gardner Merchant and we were doing a sort of 3-year repitch for the contract, and I was so naive at the time that I didn't understand that under 2P the people would remain the same even if the company changed. And what I learnt then, and have been reminded of many times since, is that it's all about the team. Actually, it's all about the team. And if you have the right team, then you can have an effective food service with a contractor or in-house. Now, I'm not expert enough on the business side of it to know in fine detail which is more cost effective, but in terms of the quality of what the students and teachers experience, you have to have the right manager, overall manager, you have to have the right chef, you have to have a lean team who are well managed, and and you have to have the right purchasing arrangements. And I think the purchasing, when we went in-house, was the key, that we had a very good purchasing arrangement with lots of local sourcing, and that was really what made the difference in terms of the quality of what the children ate. So I don't really have an informed view on whether in-house or company-based is better. I think my instinct would be to be in-house because we could be more different. And the problem with having a big contractor is that they obviously benefit from economies of scale, and what the girls are eating at St Paul's will be pretty much like what the students are eating in the 20 other schools that they have in the local area. And we wanted to be different, and we wanted to be able to respond to cultural tastes in food. And also I wanted to give my chef that creativity and that responsibility, and that's what kept a really good person in the job, and somebody who'd never worked in a school before and wouldn't probably have worked in any other school. So we lifted the aspiration above the conventional framework of school cooking to a much more ambitious, much more entrepreneurial, much more imaginative sort of restaurant attitude, if you like, to it all.
Thank you.
That really answers your question.
No, it absolutely does. It sort of illustrates the power of individuality and autonomy and being able to essentially to serve what you think that your pupils will enjoy and will talk about and will learn from as well. Whereas if perhaps if it's handed to a third party, you don't necessarily have that level of influence or control.
That's right. That puts it much better than I did, Alex. I think the other thing is that the test is the people who eat it. I really got fed up with contractors coming in and saying, well, the first thing to say is we are passionate about food. Well, I switch off at that point because they all say that. And I actually don't care whether they're passionate about food. What I want to do is to cook food that the children are really looking forward to eating. And I found that the educated palate, if you like, is, if you serve lots of pre-packaged food, kids would probably tend to eat it because they know what it is and they can eat it quickly. But they actually enjoyed eating more unusual foods, more cooked from scratch food, and those would be the meals they would go home and talk about. So you really just got to tune into them, and that is a very reliable litmus test of how good it is.
I think having been in contract catering for nearly 40 years.
I knew I was going to insult somebody.
Are you passionate though about? Are you still passionate about it, Vince?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking back to my sort of corporate days, and when Gardner Merchant and Sodexo came together and how that worked and so on, and then subsequently doing our own thing. So building a business, and I think probably my reflection is that what worked really well was when which you're able to do if it's your own business, we were able to give autonomy to people on the ground. I would go around small schools, and one of the main questions I would ask the supervisor cook in a small primary school is, well, look, if this was your business, what would you do differently? And it used to be fascinating. And then I would push the area manager to give that person a chance to kind of do some things differently. So in our particular case, we know that the quality of the food. So go back to the Durham example. Before the free school meal, we took over from a large contractor. We changed the whole dynamic and went to fresh food. And within 4 terms, we had an increase in uptake of 12% kids coming because they wanted it. So I think the market is broadly split 50-50, whatever sectors you look at between contracted and in-house. And you touched on the points as to why it works. I think there's lots of independents out there, and also some of the bigger contractors over time have realised that they need to get tuned in to what matters on the ground. So we could probably spend the next hour debating this. So I'd just like, if I may, just move on to diverse leadership. So I've got a question on diverse leadership for you. You have a line in your book, the wisest know they are not good at everything and gather around themselves colleagues who complement rather than replicate their particular skills. And that really kind of resonated with me, because I've seen over my kind of many years the power of having people who don't just agree with you, the importance of having women in your management teams, your boards. At Waterfall, we had 6 on the management board, and 2 of them were women, and they came at it from a different angle. And so I wondered, from an education point of view, whether how you built that team that would be different, because I could imagine lots of people working in your sector were really committed and really proactive and so on. How did you build those diverse skills in your sort of leadership team?
It's a great question, and I need to think about it. I think age diversity was one thing I always felt very strongly about. I always have done. Maybe because I've worked with young people so much, I have great respect for the wisdom of the young, and I think on the boards I've served on, I'm often the one saying, well, we're diverse in various ways, but actually the average age is 50 something or whatever. We need younger people here because we don't have the lens on how the Generation Z clients that we have are thinking. So how are we going to make good decisions if we don't have that perspective? So I think, and I think in the way I built my leadership teams in schools, that's also been a factor. So when I first became a head, I was the youngest person in the leadership team by quite a long way. By the time I left St Paul's, those roles had reversed. So I had brought in much younger people into my senior team who were ambitious, who had ideas, and who I thought would challenge me more. So age diversity, I think, is one often neglected but important bit of the diversity question. I think the most important thing is to be aware of those things that you've read out, that we do. People naturally appoint in their own image, and that's and we've seen so many problems with boards that are much too monolithic and much too narrow-minded because of that. So I would always look for people who I thought were brighter than me. I think it's, you should aim to be the least talented person in the room, always. And I would look for people who I'm, to have at least some people I would find difficult, because, again, if you've got people who agree with you all the time, that's a very dangerous place to be. So to look for challenge and to look for talent that's greater than your own, and especially that's different from your own. I think you have to have that top of mind when you're hiring, and that's the way I'd like to think I did it. I mean, of course, it doesn't make for the easiest life if you do that necessarily. And I certainly hired a couple of people who were a handful, and I wasn't that sorry when they went on to hire things somewhere else. But I think a leadership team, I'm probably twice in my career, I've got to the point where I've had the leadership team from heaven, or I just felt we were absolutely flying. We really loved working together. We were working incredibly hard. The people around us could see how much we were enjoying it, and they caught that. And we just kind of reached that sweet spot where everything was somehow in balance. There was enough challenge, there was enough collaboration, all those difficult things were balanced. But it took me probably 6 years in my first headship to get there, and a bit longer in my second one, because you're never starting from a clean sheet of paper. Well, maybe you are if you start a business, that would be fun to do, but normally you're inheriting something which is good, got good bits and not so good bits, and you're finessing that as time goes on. but it is one of the most interesting things, I think, and just the most amazing feeling when you do get that very exciting, diverse team. Is that what you meant?
Yes. I mean, one of the things we did, and it'd be interesting if my last question was somebody else, that we made an assessment of the shareholders in the team to look at what was important for us in terms of growth was appetite towards opportunity and risk. So we got all 6 of us to do a ranking and analysis of all the other people in the team. So we then scored everybody on a pessimistic and optimistic chart. So we knew exactly where all of us would sit relative to opportunity and risk. And it was important that we had that balance, because if you had everybody, you know, the sort of upside of optimists, you just go for everything, and you probably lose lots of money. So you need the pessimists in there, and so on and so on. I wonder in the education model, you know, what are those differences to get that diversity? What are those sort of thought processes you might have gone through?
Well, you can use all the psychometric instruments, of course, that there are available if you want to. And we did do that in a couple of the appointments I made. We did use psychometric testing to go more deeply into the personal preferences and so on of the people we were hiring. And I'm very interested in what you said about optimism and pessimism. I think that, you know, that is a very interesting scale as well to think about. The other thing that I think it's often neglected is pace and people's preferred pace. And it isn't necessarily linked to optimism and pessimism. You can have pessimists who move much too fast and optimists who won't do anything as well. So I think that's a really important thing. And to me, learning about your own pace and optimal pace is a very, very, very important aspect of leadership. Because quite often the most strong thing to do is nothing, but nothing not forever, nothing until a certain point, and knowing when to do when that point arrives. So I think that's just an aside. I think the answer really is just being alive to the need for a degree of personal discomfort, because people who are different from you in all those ways are not always comfortable, I think the other aspect of it for me was, in terms of who does what within the senior team, to have enough activity that is collaborative, so to give everyone a feeling that they have a stake in the strategy, you know, they're ambitious, and that they're going to be part of shaping something, and that they're going to have a personal they've got a personal investment in the success of what goes on, and they can see what their part was in that. But also where you've got to have dispersed responsibility for particular parts of the business, that those are also clearly defined. So everyone's got their own bit that they do, as well as coming together for the bigger piece of strategy, which excites them. And I think where my teams were most successful, or where people got incredible fun out of and fun I think is very important, out of that big picture thinking and the strategy part, but that they were not jealous of each other in the other areas. They had respect for the way their special skills were valued in the other parts as well. But people need both. They need that responsibility, because everyone, I think what we all want to use our judgment. Ambitious people want to know that they have trusted judgment. So you have to disperse enough responsibility to trust people, and for them to really know that you do trust them. But then at the same time to feel that they're inputting to that greater thing as well.
Great, cool. Thank you. We've only got a few minutes. Kathryn, please.
I just wanted to build upon that, because the way that you worked with your leadership team sounds ideal, and I completely understand where that flow can happen when you get that team in place and how all cylinders are running. How did that cascade into what the students were learning, and from an education standpoint?
So I had always within the schools I've led, structures and opportunities of leadership, which, if you like, mirrored what the adults had. So we would have a prefect team, or a top team, a head girl team, whatever it might be called, in the school, and I would meet with that team every week. So and I would always say to the girls at St Paul's, you guys are my eyes and ears into the school. So we never had an agenda, but they would come on every Friday, and I would provide whatever treat it was they felt like having that week. And we would just spend 20 minutes with me listening to them, and sometimes asking them questions about how certain things were going down. So maybe we changed a particular system, or we got a new chef, let's say, going back to catering. What did you think about the food this week? And this is when you hear, well, why do they have to call it chicken Italienne when we know it's just chicken with peppers? Why have we got to have these pretentious names on all the food? Well, okay, so that was a conversation I could go away and have. But we would talk about all sorts of things. They talked about their relationship with the boys' school and the culture in the boys' school and how that was a problem to them, thinking topically about what we've been reading about. So, and they would talk to me about how they were managing certain things. What, as a head girl team this year, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to work on overuse of mobile phones, and we're going to work on respecting your friends, or whatever it might be. So they would choose some projects that they would work on within the school during their term of office for a year. So if you like, I was coaching them in collaborative leadership and watching them learn that commitment is more important than talent, or at least as important. What happens when you try and organise a ball with the boys' school, and you find that oddly you're doing everything, and the boys are just saying, but no, we don't want it like that, and we don't want it like that, and the girls are going away and feeling, hang on, we were meant to be doing this together. So I'm caricaturing it, but watching them learn those lessons about working together and coaching them in how to solve those things, but not, so that would be one way. But I think it's important within any organisation for leadership to be visible and for teams to enjoy working together, and that was the culture that we tried to create. So it was important that the top team were visibly supportive of each other. One of the things that was very powerful, I only realised afterwards how powerful it was, which seemed quite a simple thing, was that we would have an entire team meeting, brief one, every Friday morning. So at the end of the week, I would have all the staff together in the sort of common room for 10 minutes at the beginning of the day, where I could thank people for things that had happened that week. People could give the odd notice or announcement. We could congratulate this or that person. And that 10 minutes, you could see the interplay between individuals in the room. It was often great fun. Again, it was an opportunity to celebrate. Sometimes I had something really difficult to say. When I announced my departure, that was probably the hardest one. But there might be sad things that had to be conveyed, a bereavement perhaps somewhere in the school, but they were very strong together moments. And I think in all those ways you build that sense of team working.
Well, look, I'm afraid, sadly, we're out of time. I think this could go on for another hour with ease. So look, Clarissa, I have to say a great thank you to you. Thank you for being so upfront and honest and open. It's been a pleasure to listen to you this morning. Thank you to the whole panel for your interaction, your comments as well. And I'm sure we've actually got some questions as well, which we need to answer as well, which we'll get across to you. Perhaps we can answer a bit later on as well. But look, thank you so much, everyone, today for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, very soon. But again, my thanks to all of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great. Bye-bye.